I'm Lance Schuttler, and I'm here with my friend Ed Prado, who's the CEO of RAIR, which is an incredible Web3 company, and they're doing amazing things in this world. Ed, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be part of your discussion here.
Yeah, so Ed, you and I met through a mutual friend in this Web3 space, cryptos, NFT. What is RAIR, and how did you get into all this?
Yeah, we met 5 years ago, I remember, through a mutual friend. And back then, Web3 just started sort of eking itself out into the mainstream. And that was mostly through NFTs. And what RAIR was back then, our journey started with NFTs. So we had our CTO, Garrett Minks. He's from Texas, really bright kid. He brought to me this idea, and he had written a white paper on using NFTs as a proxy for digital rights management. So if you know anything about digital rights management, you buy a piece of software, or if you're watching Netflix or what have you, it has to go through a big, long sort of algorithm to show that you have the right to watch something or download something. So in his white paper, he had articulated how great it would be if there was a decentralized, because we know the blockchain's power, one of its biggest powers, is it decentralizes the information into sort of a commons database that anybody can access. And his idea was to take the DRM infrastructure and decentralize it so that no one company had access or the keys to knowing if you had access. It was a decentralized function. So if you owned an NFT, that NFT would go through our system and check if you had rights to view or access a particular item. And if you did, then it would signal back and that item would render. Very interesting technology. We have a patent that's pending on that. And that's really where the company started. As exciting as that was, we were so far ahead of the market. At the time, NFTs had just started to kind of come mainstream, and there was a lot of, if you look at the trajectory, RAIR started, and then literally 6 months later, the Beeple NFT sale for $60 million happened. And I always tell people that the NFT sort of tied to a piece of art was a good and bad thing. It was great because the mainstream media started really teaching people that you could own something and have that ownership be rendered on chain. So it was an important sort of teaching lesson, like, hey, that Beeple piece of art can actually be authenticated on chain, and you can own it. You can own something that's sort of digitally rendered and provided. So that was a great thing. The downside was the market got completely ahead of itself. A lot of people lost money. And there was a lot of companies that started up, that failed. But we were in that vein, and we were very much sort of in the center of it. And we were trying to create some utility for all these NFTs. Hey, you guys have NFTs? You could take those NFTs and actually tie it to products, to media, to movies. And we got pretty far down the line, but it was evident that we were so far ahead of the market that particular technology was more of a feature and not a product. So with that, we kept, like any entrepreneur, you create a startup, and it's all about market signal. Like, what's the market telling us? And the market was telling us it was very early days for Web3 infrastructure. However, really exciting. Web3 and the blockchain, gives you the ability to, transfer assets very easily. It gives you the ability to validate assets through some decentralized blockchain. And it also gives you interoperability through that whole mechanism. So you can validate, you can interoperate. So these sorts of things are capabilities that you just don't see in normal, what we call Web 2 technologies. So, if you look at where we're at today with most of the internet technology, that's referenced as Web 2. It's like you can read and you can write to the internet, but you can't really prove you own. And Web 3's promise is, hey, you could prove you own something. And in that ownership comes a whole lot of other benefits. So we knew we were onto something, and we knew that, that Web3 was likely here to stay, but we were very much in the beta phase of that world. So we went back and we started building marketplaces. We thought, well, if our technology that we have a patent on is ahead of the market, maybe we go back and start building infrastructure and providing that infrastructure for others as a means of just staying alive. And we did that. We built several NFT marketplaces, and then we built a project for a carbons trading platform that was really interesting, and just small projects that kind of kept us alive. But in that, we started recognizing that we had operated with most of these protocols, these other chains and wallets. And if you look at Web3 and the blockchain, it's very nuanced. It happened very quickly. There aren't any standards. So when you're going to build, everything's constantly changing. You've got, and a lot of it is Ethereum, and basically they're like the largest entity in there. But when you actually glue something together, it's like 80% Web 2, storage, compute, things of that nature, like a website, a front end. And then it's like 20% Web 3 that's constantly changing. So we started recognizing that we had sort of nailed down how to deal with these different platforms and these different nuances in the technology. And we really started kind of homogenizing it into one place, and that's what evolved into RAIR Protocol. So that's where we're at today.
Amazing. So obviously there's so much activity and movement that has been taking place over the years with Web3, crypto, NFTs, and there's something called self-sovereign infrastructure.
Yes.
What is that? And you guys are pioneering this stuff in Web3. You've touched on this and kind of alluded to it. So why are you guys different from other Web3 companies? Because there have been a bunch of them have failed. It's always evolving. Why are you guys different? I think that's the big thing that people would want to know.
So one of the things that we did, and we did this recently, so like I said, we'd accumulated all this technology and capabilities. And if you look at the blockchain, it's a very open infrastructure environment. All the contracts are open. Everything is decentralized. Everything is meant to be transparent. And that's great. As you're building, you realize that that's awesome. However, the top layer of Web3 development is very closed. And by that I mean it's dominated by some very large players that have SaaS models. So it's software as a service. If you want to go in and use their tooling or their infrastructure, you're paying them a certain amount of money per month, and they give you an API key, and it's very opaque. It's very closed. So when my partner Garrett, who I'd mentioned earlier, the kid that actually brought us the idea of the DRM NFTs, he came to me last year. He's like, I've got an idea. I think we should just open source everything that we've worked on and be the first open source DApp, decentralized application protocol in Web3. And I thought, wow. And my old school sort of hat was on, and I was like, Garrett, we've done this for like 4 years. How the hell are we going to make money on that? Like, that was my first thought. I'm like, open source, I always think of like, kumbaya, and we're holding hands and we're trying to solve the world's problems for free. And then I kind of took a deep dive, and I've always read a lot about Linux. So Linux, the biggest, operating system in the world, is open source. And it has a companion product that's called Red Hat, and the Linux-Red Hat relationship is one where Linux is the open source and it's free, but then Red Hat is a publicly traded company that basically came from Linux and advises and consults and brings projects through the Linux protocol or the open source nature of Linux. So we started looking at that, and we started thinking about, what this would bring us. And one of the experiences that sort of solidified the decision to go open source is we were working a year before that, we were working with Sony. And Sony in Japan heard about our technology where you can unlock media, and they were excited. They're like, wow, this would be great. We would love to figure out a system where we use your system to unlock movies and sell maybe portions of movies that are collectible, but then, if you have that NFT, you could see that part of the movie and you'd have some kind of collectability. If you know the Japanese market, it's where it's ground central for collectibles. I mean, that's where Pokemon was invented. So we went out to Japan, and one of the things that we learned in that experience is that as excited as large companies were about RAIR, they weren't excited that we owned all the code, because it created a risk for them they couldn't overcome. So they do a big project with us, we go out of business, and they're hosed. So they told us, like, if we do something with you, it's got to be open source. And so I remember that nugget of information when Garrett told me, he's like, we should just open source this. And then I kind of married the two, and I'm like, you know what? I think you're right. I think if we open source this, there's other ways to monetize it. And more importantly, there's ways to get it to the market that are different and basically less friction in a less frictionless sort of way, that we can expand on Web3. I mean, if you look at Web3 is great. It's great technology. It's really exciting. It's really promising, but it's filled with friction. From the wallet on down to crypto, on down to the regulators, on down to, there's just filled. It's a bumpy road. And I think the more that you smooth that out, the more users you're going to wave in. So we went and meticulously open sourced RAIR, which is like millions of lines of code. And there's an open license. It's called Apache. This is what Elon uses for Grok, where he open sourced some of his AI. And you could use that, and that's basically what we did. And the law, according to Apache, whenever you use RAIR code and you've basically forked or copied our repo or our repository or lines of code, you need to attribute it back to us. So there's people that have copied our code, and we're great. Like that's awesome. But where the magic lies is we know this code better than anybody. So when projects come to us, we could help them, and then basically and we'll talk about this, there's a token involved, and we'll talk about the tokenomics of it. But there's a lot of ways, we call them like, there's meta ways to monetize our platform that doesn't have to do with just charging monthly. So going back to your question about sovereignty, you are only as sovereign as the code you have and the power you have over what you've built. And what we're saying is, hey, you go build on Third Web, that's a big competitor, and they have like every bell and whistle, and they're funded, they got $100 million, but they're like the next Google or Microsoft in that they're venture backed, they're charging you monthly, they have all your data. So in the end, you really don't own much. You're basically using their black box to make something happen. But if they go away, or if you want the code, you don't get the code. So while with RAIR, it's all open. It's all yours. Go at it. Let's build this thing. Let's better it together. And that is very distinct. That's a very distinct difference in what we offer. So what we say is that it's self-sovereign, like it's yours. You build it, you own it. I mean, you're gonna have to attribute the code pursuant to the Apache license back to us, but it's your sandbox. You can do with it what you want. And it's interesting, once we kind of created that small pivot, we had a flood of opportunities, because then all of a sudden, we weren't looked at as a competitor, we were looked at as a true partner. So Sony ended up creating their own blockchain called Sonium, and they came back to us and they're like, this is great, you're open source, we can work with you, let's integrate. So we're in the process of doing something with them. Alchemy, which is the other sort of very large well-funded entity in the space. We have a deal with them where we've integrated a lot of their pieces of technology into our stack. And then if people use it, they actually compensate us. So they have an API key. So they're part of their stack requires, maintenance fees and what have you. So we've created a relationship with them that they basically, kind of pay us for referrals. It's a kind of a referral relationship. And then we've got this whole tokenomics part of our ecosystem that we'll talk about. But that's the sovereignty part is important. In the end, you need to own your code. And it's really important as this thing goes mainstream and as enterprises take this in, they need to have the confidence that they own their code. Because at the end of the day, that's the risk. The company goes out of business, but in this case, you have your code. We go out of business, you still have your code.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really where things are moving in this world, especially today, is people want to own their own stuff. They don't want it, held by someone else, and rightfully so. So I think that's so cool. You guys made that huge pivot, and a flood of opportunities opened up for you. So that's amazing. And, another question I've got then is, how do you recruit developers for this? Because this is so different. I would assume there's a lot of training involved and mindset shifts coming from a different paradigm.
That's an excellent question. And it's interesting. We went through this accelerator. So Redbeard Ventures is one of the top Web3 venture groups, and they invested in us about 6 months ago. And then we started working with their accelerator. And that was one of the things that surfaced. It's like, hey, you're an open source platform. An open source platform is only as good as the code and then the developers that actually enhance or fix or better, the code. So we, through that experience, we ended up using RAIR protocol to develop a companion application called DevDapp, DevDapp.com. And this was really fascinating. So if you know anything about developing, a lot of it or all of it happens within this program called GitHub. GitHub is owned by Microsoft, and it's basically where the developers live, and it's where they check in code. It's where they sort of check on projects and do tasks. And it's basically an incredibly robust task management platform for developers. So what we did is we created the first Web3 wallet that's attached to GitHub, and we created what we believe is the first GitHub incentivization layer. So developer comes into GitHub, they log into their GitHub wallet through DevDapp, much like you would log into maybe, some place on the internet with using your Google email. It's called OAuth. So they OAuth into GitHub. We get their GitHub info. And then basically anything they do in our GitHub, they get compensated for in the wallet we created for them attached to their GitHub handle. So very, very clever, this whole thing. We just launched this last week. And in 1 week, we've had 475 developers that have basically connected their GitHub credentials with DevDapp. So really exciting. And they've so part of what we've done in DevDapp is educational, like, hey guys, here's what RAIR's all about. Here are the things that you could build with RAIR. Here's some sample code. So part of it's educational, and then part of it is reward driven, where it's like, hey, if you do these 3 things, we'll give you some points, and those points translate to our token that we'd basically pay out to them. But it also extends out to platforms that we're working with. So right now we're in discussions with, a host of L2s like Avalanche and CeeLo and Polygon, and there's a whole bunch of layer 2s that are very sophisticated, but are always looking to bring on developers, applications, and basically fill their block space. So we could easily take like an Avalanche, for instance, or an Epoch. We're dealing with this company called Epoch. They basically provide compute. And we can create a bounty and say, hey, you'll get $100 of Epoch tokens if you do these 3 things with Epoch. So it's a very, it's an interesting way to incentivize these developers that are all over the place. And if you look at like Web3 developers, a lot of them came from Web2, but a lot of them are very kind of siloed. And this is a way to kind of bring them together in a community and compensate them for what they do. And at the same time, it's also a way to educate Web2 developers on what we're doing, give them an idea of how easy it is to build on RAIR, because we've homogenized everything, and allow them to play in our sandbox. Okay, maybe you guys build some things. The last thing that we're doing that's pretty exciting, we are sponsoring a series of hackathons. So right now we're with Hack India, and India has about 49% of all developers in the world, which is a crazy number. Most of those are Web 2 types, but these hackathons, they go for 6 months at a time, and the one we're sponsoring is focused on colleges. So there's 25,000 college students. So they come in, they register with DevDapp, they go through a couple of exercises. The platform actually provides videos. So going back to our original IP, which was attaching NFTs to videos, we had a lot of that technology. So we surfaced that, and we actually have a video on, hey guys, this is how you would do this Web3 activity. And then if they do it, they accumulate points. So we were trying to gamify the experience. So in the end, we see DevDapp as an onboarding funnel to RAIR protocol. And it's working. Like those 2 things working in tandem, we see as a really good model. And then the third thing that we're working on right now, this is probably most exciting, is using RAIR protocol and DevDapp and all the data and exhaust that comes from that to create an AI agent that would then basically automate a lot of these things that developers are doing. So our vision is to create what we call a text to DApp scenario, where if you text, hey, build me a DeFi app that stakes Ethereum, pays 10%, and also generates an NFT to the person who is staked, it would basically run through all the code and it would build, a skeletal sort of version of that you can then deploy in the market. So that's where we're headed. And we're actually working on this now because we see this as a very tangible result of putting all this data together that we've been working with.
Amazing. So what are like some use cases in, let's just say, like the everyday world? Because this is really incredible. And like for a person who doesn't understand what crypto or NFTs are, Web3, developing apps, things like this, where's the future of this going in like everyday uses for just the common people?
Yeah, so certainly, we're going to see more and more use cases as this becomes easier to program, and as the technology democratizes itself, you're going to see just a bevy of use cases and things. Some of the more interesting things we've seen, there's a group up in LA that it's a clinical group that has these rehabilitation centers, and they have created, using RAIR, a counseling service that compensates their patients for attending counseling. Okay, so you go in with crypto and you pay for your counseling sessions, and then if you stay on track, they basically start paying with crypto these rewards. They start rewarding you with crypto for staying on schedule for your counseling. Now this sounds like a crazy idea, like, wait a minute, so you're taking like people that are rehabilitating themselves, former drug addicts, alcoholics, or what have you, and you're putting them on this track. But the interesting thing is they're actually using this to expand their rehab into crypto. So they found that crypto had a lot of need for this. There's a lot of crypto people, a lot of them are, gamblers and addicts, and they have that tendency. So they're actually reaching out to the crypto world, and they're creating this. It's a very necessary thing. It's like, hey, we're going to provide counseling for you guys. You can pay for it with all your crypto, and guess what? We have a fund that people have contributed to, where we'll actually pay you to attend sessions and better yourself. Very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely transforming the whole model of health, medicine, all these sorts of things. What are some uses for movies, music, media in general? Because I know you guys have done some things in that world, and certainly working on things with that.
Yeah. So through the IP that we have a patent pending on, there's a lot you could do. I mean, essentially, when you have, an NFT is basically just a little programmable object. And with that programmable object, you can, the sky's the limit. I mean, we used to say we could redevelop a Netflix in a box. Like, you could, if you were a producer, if you had, content, you could sell an NFT to your site and basically, circumvent the YouTubes of the world. If you had the eyeballs, like let's say you had a private, if you had a lot of followers, you can go direct with them and sell them an NFT that would give them rights to a season, a show. We could program that NFT anyway. So we were working with a couple of use cases very similar to that, big influencers, people that had the eyeballs, because that's the thing. YouTube gives you the eyeballs. So if you've got good content, then all of a sudden you could do something there, and then they pay you on commercials. This model is more so you've got that channel, but maybe you want to do a VIP channel where people would actually buy an NFT. They're part of this special club, and then that club gives them content, and that NFT is their pass, or it's the digital rights management to be able to see that content. So we've looked at that model with music, with videos, with education. So there's a couple of projects that we've been working on where the NFT is a class. And once you complete the class and you take a test, you're given another NFT automatically into your wallet. And that NFT is another series of videos, and it keeps replicating, and at the end you get a certificate. So things of that nature I think will come. But again, we're very early days. We're just exiting the beta phase of this whole technology. People ask me, like, well, where's Web3? I go, Web3 is in the flip phone days. Like, it's cool, hey, check it out. I can make a cell phone call, but we haven't even imagined that you can have apps on that phone. From a statistics standpoint, A16Z, which is one of the biggest venture firms in the world, and they do a lot in Web3, they put out a report back in November, and they were just trying to address the market and how nascent it is. And they said that about, I think it's 650 million people hold crypto, which is a lot. Almost 10% of like the world owns some crypto. However, only 5 to 10% of those people, so say 6 million people, there's 60 million people, actually use the crypto for any application. And the real great thing about crypto is that it's transferable, it's usable, it's electronic money that is meant to facilitate applications. So we haven't even scratched the surface of potential. And that's why I think that RAIR is really well positioned in that if we can simplify the build, if we can provide developers that do the build, and then we can add AI and make it just a lot easier to basically take in and build these, we'll go from flip phone to iPhone, App Store, to like where we are today with the phone. Like it'll happen pretty fast. But that's where we're at. We're just at the flip phone phase. Like, hey, I could send money to you. Hey, stablecoin. I mean, right now the biggest use for crypto is stablecoins. It's like, USDC, Tether, as a proxy for cash, which is cool. It's a killer. It's great. It solves a lot of problems. So I think that, the more we make this technology sort of easier to access, the more real, truly useful apps will come from it. I think in years past, a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to do the Web3 version of Instagram. Like, well, nobody needs that. It's like, and it's like any new technology. Like, I remember I was part of the internet, like back in the 90s, and everybody was trying to transform, like, oh, I'm going to do like, this or that, but on the internet. And it's like, well, a lot of those things, worked just fine. So I think we saw a lot of that in Web3, and now we're sort of getting more into some serious use cases and some scenarios that would require. And one of the biggest ones is AI. I think that artificial intelligence, I think all these LLM models, I think all of that, in being that is such compute heavy, programmatic heavy, is all going to require some rails of money, and those rails are crypto. You're not going to put a credit card into an AI agent. I mean, that's not how it's going to function. It's all going to happen with crypto. It's all going to happen with programmatic money, which is what crypto is. So I really see that there's a lot of these opportunities that are going to accelerate due to AI. And it's even better that we have an administration now that is a little more open to crypto. And we'll get some rules and regs that can kind of support the community. While before we had a lot of people that are like, okay, I'm going to go set up in Malta or, the Caribbean or what have you. So yeah, it's exciting.
So is this a technology then that, you're talking about different apps and marketplaces and people having eyeballs, so like, could something like X or Rumble or the YouTubes of the world, is that something that they could adopt this technology, or is that like something completely different?
It's interesting. We early on we got contacted by YouTube. They were very interested in what we were doing, and the reason they were interested is they thought if they created this massive influencer, like they created Joe Rogan, let's say, they wanted to figure out if through an NFT they can take a piece of Joe Rogan for life, which is very kind of Machiavellian. It's like, whoa, you like own me. But they were very interested in that sort of idea, like, hey, if we push an influencer and we really make him, is there any way that then if he leaves and goes to another siloed sort of, destination, could we continue on? And there's probably different models where you could do it, but I think it just got too complicated. And I think that for them at the time, they had so many internal issues going on that they kind of canned all their Web3 NFT people, and they just stayed the course with what they were doing. I think it's hard for mainline companies to really play in this world right now, given all the uncertainties. There were so many uncertainties, 2 years ago. I mean, you're asking Google to basically play with NFTs, but NFTs could be securities, and they're domiciled here in the US, and maybe the SEC comes after them. So I think that for the most part, a lot of that is just subject to better rules and regs and just a little more, hindsight on what it is we're doing and what are the implications. And I think a lot of that's going to get sorted out. Trump's made it very clear that this is a big opportunity for the U.S. And he has a crypto czar that he's appointed, and they're working really hard. In fact, today they had the first ever, crypto meeting in D.C., like digital asset meeting, like really exciting stuff. Like this stuff should have been going on, years ago. Instead, we were getting choked off, and we had very little clarity, and the SEC was going crazy. So I think the more clarity we get, the more the larger enterprises will come. And right now, it's been just a fight of it's a very small technology in its beta phase with a lot of unclear signals from the government. So larger companies would just run from it.
So if you could choose a few companies, like dream clients, like right now where things are at, what are some companies, I mean, if you want to name them, or even just in general, what are some of those companies that you would love to work with, given what you've got for technology and maybe what they're doing? Like, what would be a good marriage between them?
It's a great question. I think one of the companies that is a dream client is Sonium. So Sony and Sonium, like there's a lot of synergies there. There's our media platform. They created their own chain that's called Sonium. So I think there's a lot to do with them. But at the same time, now that they've opened themselves up to that, it's much more competitive to do something with them. But I guess we look at it a little differently. We're not pursuing like the Walmarts of the world or like, these huge entities. We are basically pursuing developers. And we think that if we get enough developers sort of under our hat, we can improve the technology well enough to where it becomes mainstream. And that's where it gets exciting. So it's not really client driven, it's platform driven. Like if we better this thing, and it almost sounds irresponsible because you're like, so if you build it, they'll come. It's sort of like that because right now it is so fragmented that if we homogenize this in the right way and get the developers building on it, the developers inevitably, we always say like, hey, 1 in 2,000 shots on goal is going to be like a really good shot. And maybe they develop this next application that goes viral. And that's really what the space needs. And that's really what we would benefit from. And from that would then come all this sort of attention from these larger Fortune 500s. We spent a lot of time in the past 4 years chasing down, Fortune 500, Hollywood, and music business. And all of it is so difficult to penetrate. You would basically go completely out of business if that was your model. You basically have to make them come to you. We had several dealings with music and the like, and just the legalities and the music rights, and they're fragmented between the producer and the record label and the actual musician. Like it is just a very complex web. And then you layer on top of that an NFT or something that's not, black and white from a regulatory standpoint, and you end up someplace where things just don't move forward. But I think that if those verticals ended up doing something in Web3, we're really well positioned to support them. We've got, the IP for it. We'll have the developers for it. We'll have the applications that are tied to our system for it. So we'll be there to sort of clean up. But I think right now our focus is let's make this easier. Let's homogenize the platform so the developers can focus on the applications and not the infrastructure. And then bring on partners. We've brought in a ton of partners. And collectively, I think that will get us some big clients.
Yeah, amazing, Ed. So what's the next 6 months or so look like for RAIR? What are you guys working on? What do you want to share? What's
the big thing we're doing right now is when we went open source, we created a DAO, which is a decentralized autonomous authority. It's basically like a foundation that we put the code into. That foundation lives in the Marshall Islands. So we did this prior to this administration coming in. There's still no clarity on where things are going. But so we set up a foundation in the Marshall Islands, and we contributed all the code for the RAIR protocol to that foundation. So that foundation owns the protocol. At the same time, the U.S. entity, RAIR Technologies, is a Delaware C Corp, and it holds DevDApp. It also holds the contracts that we have with certain clients. If they want to use the DAO, if they want to use the protocol, but really don't know how to facilitate it directly, we act as a consulting agent to them. So there's this yin and yang. The DAO is going to issue tokens and raise money through a token round. And that's what we're in the middle of right now. We're raising $5 million of a token round in the DAO. And then a lot of that is happening through a pre-sale where we're dealing with a lot of these other platforms. So like the ones I mentioned, Epoch and Avalanche and CeeLo and all these entities that basically would really benefit from being a big part of the protocol, we're pursuing for an investment in our tokens. So I had mentioned our token earlier, and now is probably a good time to talk about how it functions. So the token, there's an earn. I always say there's an earn and there's a burn. The earn portion of our token goes to developers. So you're a developer, you did 5 things that we'd benefit from or the community would benefit from. We put a bounty, we pay you in RAIR tokens. So now you're holding the RAIR token, and you'd probably liquidate it because most developers are hand them out. They're like, oh, I did this project, I got $100, liquidated $100. The burn part is when you get down to platforms and enterprises, they would buy and either stake our token, so hold our token like in a contract where they can't sell it, which is really good because it's deflationary. Or they would burn our token. So if they want real access to our developers, they could, we put certain contracts together with them where they would basically stake or burn our token. So there's the earn to the developers and there's the burn. And we have a very elegant tokenization model in our plan. But that's a good sort of highlight of it. So that's why the token is really critical to our ecosystem. So let's say Walmart wanted to create a supply chain with the ecosystem. We would require them to purchase some tokens and hold them. And maybe they do that through the US entity, or maybe they do it direct. They'd have a choice there depending on the regulatory sort of hurdles there. So they would hold them, and then they'd have access to the developers. They'd have access to an enhanced version well, they have basically the open source is always there, but we would aid them and basically consult them in getting their project off the ground. So we're very focused right now on getting the token launched, and that's an important part because without a token in the marketplace, that's a piece of the puzzle that we haven't finished yet. And it's one we held off on in 2022, frankly, because the market was so bad. We thought, wow, Terra Luna, FTX, like all these things were happening that were just terrible. So having an investment background, like let's hold off on the token. But now we feel that given where we're at with the open source nature of the project, given where we're at with, sort of the global crypto scene, that it's a good time now to get that out in the marketplace. So we're doing a $5 million pre-sale with partners and the like, and then we're going to do what's called a TGE, which is a token generation event in May, where we're actually going to put this out on Uniswap so that it's out, it's free trading, and it's priced. There's a fully diluted value, and people could look at it. But the goal here is to get this token out and to support it with the DAO and in our community.
Amazing. So when you get the 5 million, because I know that you guys are gonna make this happen. You've touched on this whole thing, but then what are some of the steps after that to then take it even further?
So there's 2 things that we want to do immediately. One, continue to build the dev community. I feel strongly that if we had a liquid token, we can then use that token to bring on more developers and bounties or bonuses. We can also go out and sponsor more hackathons. Hackathons are very great for us. DevDApp not only sort of activates and pays developers, but it also does something really important for a hackathon. If I'm a hackathon and I have a sponsor, let's say Polygon is my sponsor, I can actually run the hackathon, have them do an activity in Polygon on that chain, and then I can go back and report it to Polygon and say, hey, out of the 1,000 people that were in the hackathon, 900 deployed on Polygon. Well, that isn't as clear with a normal hackathon because people just build, and at the end they kind of have a contest to see who built something really cool. So this is very, very much, we're basically creating an added layer of transparency and reporting for a hackathon to report back to its sponsors. And we're seeing this in India. We're learning so much with this Hack India. So we did Hack India last year. We didn't have DevDApp. And now we're doing it again this year, and we're recognizing that a lot of the things that we've embedded into DevDApp are not only incredible for the developer because they gamify what they're doing, but also great for the sponsors. So we want to get more hackathons going. And I think that a lot of our funding could go to backing some of those projects. The other area that we really want to focus monetarily on is AI. I think that there's a real play here, and we're already doing it, basically without the 5 million, we're already making inroads, but I think we can accelerate that incredibly with some real funding, is getting some of these AI agents working on our behalf to actually create some of these applications and make that an accelerant so that the developers could use the AI agent and then, basically be even that further ahead, and really get this out in the wild a lot faster.
Amazing. So 2 last questions, Ed. The first one, and then we'll touch on how people can get a hold of you and RAIR and all of that. But big picture, stepping way back, why do you feel like this is so important for humanity right now in the times that we're in and moving forward?
Well, there's a great book that Chris Dixon wrote. It's called Read, Write, Own. And it's all about what the promise of Web3 is. Web3's promise is basically being able to prove you own something in a digital capacity. And I know that's very I explained that to my mom and she's like, well, who cares? Right? But from a fundamental level, if you can take something and decentralize it, so you can prove, your identity, you can prove there's models that basically allow you to do all this, not only your identity, but your, what holdings you have, what digital assets you have, in a decentralized way. There's a lot that can come from that. So we're really excited to be part of that, to be part of a big part of putting that together and making it easier, not only from a programmatic standpoint, but from an understanding standpoint. Like, hey, this is what you do. This is how you do it. So that's, we're really excited to do that. I think that as you look at humanity right now, or let's not go to humanity. Let's dial it back down to the state of technology. There are these very large incumbents that own all your data that basically can easily manipulate you because they have your data. And I think that this is a hedge against that. And I think that if you can own your own data, the promise, hey, I own my own data and I get paid for it, it kind of flips the model on its head. But we're years away from that. But that's the promise. Could we see a future where Google pays you because they've actually accessed your data X amount of times, and instead of it being some black box, it's very transparent that they did this and you're giving them authority to do that? That's kind of an interesting concept. So we'll see. I mean, that's what, the sky's the limit from there. But the idea of, read, the first version of the internet, you could just read. It was just a bunch of blog posts. It was just a bunch of, pages that you just read. Second version, Web 2, was very much read, write. You'd write, you can buy, you can transact, but you could never prove ownership. You could never prove anything other than what was sent to you via Amazon or whatever you were buying. So the third version of this will be really interesting, and it'll be fascinating when it's combined with AI, because then it really gets incredible. There's going to be a lot of synergies between artificial intelligence and Web3. And the concept, I just got back from this conference. It's basically taking agents and creating a bundle of agents that do work for you. And that is really that's the next big thing. All these microservices that you need to deal with, I got to go to this site and put this credit card in, and then I got to do this, and then I got to send the email, and then I got to, these agents just do it for you. It's fascinating. And it's so hard to wrap your head around because you're like, God, I don't know if I'd trust an agent. But when you think about the mundane tasks that you do, go to Expedia, look up the flight, do this, pay the credit card, check the confirm. So a lot of those things, it's like, hey, agent, I want to go to Cabo. This is their parameters. Book a flight. Here's my budget. Okay, here it is. Here are the 3 options. Which one do you want? Number 3 is great. Done. So things, where they agenticize, that's the word, agenticize activity, that is going to be really revolutionary. It's going to give you back a lot of your time, and it's going to make workers far more productive. And that's where we're headed. That's exciting. It's exciting, and at the same time, I think for many it's scary because it's the unknown. It's like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that my agent will deal with your agent and we're just off on the beach? I hope so.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So we'll see. But that is the future, and that's why we're excited. I've been an entrepreneur for 30 years, and I love the passion and just the electricity and momentum and sort of the vibes that crypto gives off are just great. I'm older. It's a lot of younger guys. It's a lot of energy. And it's fascinating because it's really revolutionary. And you need to kind of think out of the box to take in a lot of this stuff. Force yourself to really think differently, which I like doing. I like to kind of ponder what could be.
Yep, absolutely. It's a whole new world, and you guys are revolutionizing it. I'm very honored to be, part of this in different ways, and definitely trying to help you guys get this word out there more. Ed, where can people find out more about RAIR and everything that's going on?
So rairprotocol.org, and RAIR is spelled RAIR, like it has AI in it, so it's RAIR, and that wasn't intentional 4 years ago, but certainly it's a big part of what we are now. So rairprotocol.org, that's the actual protocol. RAIR.info is where they can go for just general information on the US side. If you want us to build you something, you can go to rair.info, and we can shows in there what we're doing and how we can build and communicate with you. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Ed Prado, CEO of RAIR Technologies. And then on Telegram, everybody in crypto is using Telegram, so that's at Ed Prado, real basic. But yeah, I'd love to talk to any investors, any platforms, any builders, all those different sort of constituents are fascinating to talk to because they all come at you from different angles, and you learn a lot. And they always appreciate, what we're doing in different ways, and they might surface different things that we hadn't seen. So yeah, we'd love to build with you, talk about the space, talk about trends, what have you. But reach out to us. I'd love to talk to anybody that is interested in Web3 and applications.
Awesome, thank you, Ed. Appreciate it. Any last words?
No, I just appreciate the time here. I love. This is probably my 3rd podcast, and it's awesome because this is the first podcast since we've really gone open source. So it's been exciting to talk about the journey and where we arrived here, and it's been fascinating. It's been fun.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Ed.